Many years ago, people in Europe dreamed of a better life. They wanted land. They wanted freedom. They wanted a chance to start again. So they left their homes and sailed across the ocean to a place called America. It was a long, dangerous trip. The sea was wild. The ships were small. The food was bad. There was little water. People got sick. Some died. But still they came. Because they had hope. One of them was a young man named Gottlieb Mittelberger. He came from Germany in 1750. He wrote about his journey in a diary. He said the ship was dirty and dark. People slept on the floor. There was no fresh air. Children cried all night. He was always hungry and thirsty. He saw children die. Their bodies were thrown into the sea. It was a very hard trip. But when the ship reached land, he cried with joy. He had made it to the new world. When the people arrived, they saw trees, rivers, and sky. It looked free and full of life. But it was not easy. The winters were cold. They had to build their own homes. They had to grow their food. There were no stores, no doctors, and no roads. Every day was hard work. Men hunted and cut wood. Women cooked, made clothes, and cared for children. Children helped in the garden and brought water from rivers. But there was something special about this land. In Europe, only rich people could own land. In America, poor people could own land too. They could build farms. They could plant corn, tobacco, and rice. They could make a better life for their families. It was not easy, but it was possible. One man showed what was possible. His name was Benjamin Franklin. He was born in Boston in 1706. His father made candles. Benjamin was one of 17 children. His family was very poor. He had to stop school at age 10, but he loved to read. He taught himself by reading books. At age 17, he moved to Philadelphia with no money. He worked hard. He never gave up. By age 23, he owned his own newspaper. Later, he helped start a public library. He became one of the most famous men in the world. He once said, "I was just a poor boy with big ideas." His story gave hope to many others, but not everyone in America had hope. By 1750, 1 out of every 5 people in the colonies was a slave. These people were taken from Africa by force. They came by ship, but their trip was worse than Mittelberger's. They were chained and beaten. Many died on the way. When they arrived, they were sold like objects. They had to work on big farms. They worked long hours under the hot sun. Most were never free. Many were children. Their lives were full of sadness and pain. Native Americans also lost their homes. As more colonists came, more forests were cut down. The native people were pushed west. Some fought. Some tried to make peace. But many lost their land, their homes, and their way of life. Still, people kept coming to America. They came for land. They came for freedom. They came with dreams. They built houses, schools, and towns. They worked hard. They believed in a better tomorrow. A young girl once said to her father, "Is this our land now?" He looked at the sky and said, "If we work hard and help each other, maybe one day, yes, eh?" This was the beginning of a new land. A land full of hope. A land where poor people could dream. A land where a boy like Benjamin Franklin could change the world. But it was also a land of questions. Who would own it? Who would be free? Who would be heard? These questions would grow louder with time, and they would lead to something big. A revolution was coming. But first came the dream of a new life, a new home, and a new hope. In the year 1765, the people of America were angry. They lived in 13 colonies, but they were still part of Great Britain. The King of Britain, King George III, made new rules. He said the people in the colonies had to pay more taxes. These taxes were on things like paper, glass, and tea. But the people in the colonies said, "This is not fair." They were upset because they had no voice in the British government. They had no one to speak for them. They worked hard. They built homes and towns, but they could not choose the laws. That made them feel like children, not free people. They said, "No taxation without representation." Soon, people gathered in the streets. They shouted. They wrote letters to the king. But the king did not listen. He sent more soldiers to America. This made people even more angry. In Boston, things got worse. One winter night in 1770, a group of boys threw snowballs at British soldiers. More people came. They shouted. They threw rocks. Then someone fired a gun. No one knows who. In the confusion, the soldiers fired back. 5 colonists died. One of them was a black man named Crispus Attucks. He became known as the first person to die in the fight for American freedom. People in Boston were shocked. The newspapers called it the Boston Massacre. After that, the people were even more united. They said, "We must stand together." In 1773, 3 British ships came to Boston. They were full of tea. The British government said the colonists must buy this tea and pay tax. But the people said no. They did not want to pay the king's tax. That night, a group of men dressed as Native Americans. They climbed on the ships and threw all the tea into the sea. They worked quietly and quickly. No one stopped them. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. When the king heard about it, he was very angry. He said, "Close the harbor. No ships may come or go." This hurt the people of Boston. They could not trade. They could not get food. The king also sent more soldiers. The people of Boston felt like they were in prison. The other colonies saw this. They asked, "What if the king does this to us too?" So they began to help Boston. One colony sent food. Another sent money. They said, "If you hurt Boston, you hurt all of us." For the first time, the 13 colonies began to act like one country. In 1774, leaders from 12 colonies came together in a meeting. It was called the First Continental Congress. They met in Philadelphia. Many had never seen each other before. They were farmers, teachers, lawyers, and shopkeepers. But they shared one goal. They wanted to speak to the king with one voice. They made a list of their rights. They said, "We want freedom. We want to make our own laws. We want peace, but we want justice too." They wrote a letter to the king. It was polite but strong. It said, "Let us be free like you." They also decided to stop buying goods from Britain. No more British tea. No more British clothes. They told people to make their own things. They said, "Let's live simply. Let's live strong." But even as they wrote letters and made plans, they could feel something changing. It was not just about tea or taxes. It was about something bigger. It was about freedom. In the spring of 1775, the first battles began. In Lexington and Concord, guns were fired. People died. The war had started. But before the war spread, another young man was working quietly. His name was Thomas Jefferson. He was only 33 years old, but he believed deeply in liberty. He was asked to write a special paper. It would explain why the colonies wanted to be free. He thought carefully. He chose his words with care. And then he wrote, "All men are created equal. They have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." These words touched people's hearts. On July 4th, 1776, the colonies declared their independence. Bells rang in towns. People cheered and hugged. They burned pictures of the king. They said, "We are not British anymore. We are Americans now." But they also knew something important. Freedom would not be easy. They would have to fight for it, and many would suffer. But the dream of liberty was alive, and that dream would carry them forward. After the Declaration of Independence, the war between Britain and the American colonies became very real. The British Army was strong. It had many ships, soldiers, and guns. The American Army was new. It was small and had very little training. But it had something powerful: hope and a deep belief in freedom. George Washington was the leader of the American Army. He was calm and brave. He didn't want to be famous. He only wanted to do what was right. Washington knew his army was not ready. The men were farmers, shopkeepers, and young boys. They had few guns. Some didn't even have shoes. But they were ready to fight for their land and their future. In 1776, the British Army came back with many ships. They attacked New York City. Washington's army tried to stop them, but the British were too strong. The Americans lost the battle. They had to run. Washington made a brave choice. One cold night, he took his men across a river in small boats. They moved quietly and carefully. The water was icy. The wind was strong, but they did not stop. On the morning of December 26th, the American army surprised a group of German soldiers who were helping the British. It was in a place called Trenton, New Jersey. The Germans were still sleeping after a Christmas party. They were not ready to fight. The Americans won the battle. It gave them new hope. People in the colonies felt proud again. They believed that they could win, but the hardest time was still coming. In the winter of 1777, Washington took his army to a place called Valley Forge. It was cold and full of snow. There were no proper houses. The men built small wooden huts. Many had no warm clothes. Some wrapped old cloth around their feet. There was little food. Some soldiers made soup from leaves. Many became sick. Some died. Still, they did not give up. At Valley Forge, something special happened. A man named Baron von Steuben came from Europe to help. He taught the soldiers how to march and fight like a real army. He showed them how to work together. Slowly, the American army became stronger and more united. A young French officer named Lafayette also joined. He believed in freedom and became like a son to Washington. That spring, the army left Valley Forge with new strength. They were ready to fight again. In the South, the war became harder. The British won some big battles, but the Americans did not stop fighting. They used surprise attacks. They hid in the woods. They fought smart. A small man named Francis Marion became famous. People called him the Swamp Fox because he used the land to trick the British. In 1781, the British Army moved to Yorktown, Virginia. Their leader was General Cornwallis. He thought it was safe, but Washington had a plan. He joined with the French army. At the same time, French ships came by sea. Together, they surrounded the British at Yorktown. For days, they fired cannons. The sound was loud. Smoke filled the air. The British could not escape. They were hungry and tired. Finally, on October 17th, 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered. The war was almost over. The news traveled fast. People cheered. Bells rang. In Paris, a peace treaty was signed in 1783. The United States of America was now a free country. But the fight was not only on the battlefield. After the war, the new country needed rules. The people needed a strong government. In 1787, leaders from the states met in Philadelphia. George Washington led the meeting. They wrote the Constitution. It said that the government must serve the people. It promised rights like freedom of speech and freedom of religion. George Washington became the first president in 1789. He did not want power. He wanted peace. He said, "I do this not for myself, but for my country." The war was over, but a new journey had begun. The journey of building a nation. The United States was not perfect. There were still problems. Slavery still existed. Native Americans had lost much. Women could not vote. But the idea of freedom was alive. The dream was real, and it had begun with simple people, brave hearts, and a hope that one day all people could be free. The story you just heard is not only about war. It is about people. Simple people who had big dreams. People who wanted freedom, even when the cost was high. They were farmers, workers, and young students. They had no uniforms, few weapons, and little food, but they had strong hearts. They had a dream of a better life, and that dream helped them build a new country, the United States of America. From Benjamin Franklin's journey as a poor boy with big ideas to George Washington, who led with quiet strength and refused to give up, to Thomas Jefferson, who used his words to speak for the people, to the many unknown men and women who suffered through cold winters, hunger, and fear. They were not perfect. America was not perfect. Slavery still existed. Native people lost their land. Women had no voice. But the idea they gave the world, the idea of freedom and rights for all, changed history. Today, we can still learn from them. Life can be hard. We may face challenges, fear, and even failure. But just like the early Americans, we can be brave. We can believe in ourselves. We can build something better, step by step. True strength is not about power. It's about purpose. When you have a clear purpose, like freedom, kindness, or learning, you will find the strength to keep going, even when times are hard. So how can we apply this today? Maybe you're learning English now. Maybe it feels slow and difficult. But every word you learn is like a step in your revolution. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep practicing. One day, you will speak with confidence. You will share your own ideas. You will inspire others. And today, you did something great. You finished a full story in English. That means your listening and understanding are getting stronger. Be proud of yourself. Now here's a fun question for you. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? A. George Washington. B. Thomas Jefferson. Write your answer in the comments below, A or B, and let's see how many of you remember. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel. That helps us grow and bring you more stories like this to learn English in a fun and meaningful way. If you believe in what we do and you want to support this free content, you can also donate. Even a small donation helps us a lot. In the beginning, it's really hard to keep making quality content without support. But we do it because we care about your learning. Thank you so much for listening. Keep going, keep learning, and never stop believing in your dream.